Day 62. Numbers chapter 18, 19 and 20. For the whispers of today, we will step into a moment of transition, tension, and divine instruction. The wilderness journey is still unfolding. The people are restless. Leadership is under pressure. And God begins to clarify something many believers today struggle to understand. Holiness is not casual. It is sacred. It is weighty. And yet, it is a gift. God tells Aaron, "But only you and your sons may serve as priests. I am giving you the service of the priesthood as a gift." Pause there. A gift. Priesthood was not a promotion. It was not applause. It was weight, accountability, precision. One mistake at the altar could mean death, and yet God calls it a gift. Why? Because access to God is always a gift, even when it comes with responsibility. Many of us pray for influence, leadership, ministry, visibility. But we forget. Spiritual authority carries spiritual consequences. God also says, "From now on the Israelites must not go near the tent of meeting, or they will bear the consequences of their sin, and will die." That sounds harsh to modern ears. But the deeper truth is this. Not everyone is assigned to every space. There are spiritual boundaries for protection, not oppression. In today's world, we blur lines. Everyone wants to speak on everything. Everyone wants access without preparation. But God is intentional about proximity. Access without covering is dangerous. The priesthood was not about superiority. It was about assigned responsibility. Aaron's family would carry the burden so others would not be destroyed by careless approach. Sometimes God restricts you not because he is distant, but because he is holy. And holiness is not hostility, it is intensity. If they fail to purify themselves after touching a human corpse, they defile the Lord's tabernacle. Anything that an unclean person touches becomes unclean. We read that and think ritual, ancient culture, irrelevant. But spiritually this is profound. Death in Scripture represents the consequence of sin. Contact with death symbolized contamination. Not moral guilt, but spiritual disruption. God was teaching Israel something subtle. Uncleanness spreads. One unclean touch could affect a tent, then a family, then a community. It's not about superstition, it's about influence. Today, contamination looks like bitterness, compromise, unresolved offense, hidden habits. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Spiritual states transfer. You cannot live in constant exposure to death, spiritually speaking, and remain unaffected. God required purification, not punishment. The water of cleansing had to be applied. Notice this. If they refused cleansing, they were cut off. Not because God was cruel, but because they refused restoration. That is deeply encouraging. God always provides cleansing before consequence. But we must accept it. For those seeking God today, do not normalize what contaminates your spirit, and do not reject the cleansing he offers. Uncleanness does not disappear with time. It must be addressed. This next whisper focuses on the leader who lost the promise. Quite an unfortunate event. The people complain again. No water. Fear. Frustration. God tells Moses to speak to the rock. Instead, Moses strikes it. Water still comes out. The miracle happens. But God says, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy, you will not bring this community into the land." Moses wasn't punished for failure. He was corrected for misrepresentation. God had told him to speak. He struck. Externally, the result looked successful. Internally, trust was compromised. It is possible to produce results and still misrepresent God. That is sobering. For anyone leading, a family, a ministry, a classroom, a business, this matters. When we act in frustration, even if the outcome works, we may distort the image of the God we represent. Moses had carried the people faithfully for decades. Yet one moment of public dishonor mattered. Why so serious? Because leaders shape how others see God. If Moses strikes the rock in anger, the people may think God is angry. If we lead from pride, others may think God is proud. God guards his holiness fiercely, not to intimidate, but to preserve truth. And here is encouragement. Moses was still loved, still chosen, still used, but consequences remained. Grace does not erase accountability. That is maturity. Then comes a tender scene. God tells Moses, "Remove Aaron's garments and put them on his son Eleazar." Aaron climbs Mount Hor. His priestly garments are removed. They are placed on Eleazar. Aaron dies there. No drama, no rebellion, just transition. The priesthood continues. This is leadership succession in its rawest form. Please understand that ministry is bigger than the minister. The calling outlives the carrier. We live in a culture that idolizes personalities. But Numbers reminds us, God's work is generational. Aaron's death was not failure. It was transition. Aaron had failed before. The golden calf, moments of weakness. Yet God still honored his role to the end. His garments were not buried with him. They were transferred. What does that say? God's purposes move forward, even when people fade. You may not see the promised land in your lifetime. But obedience still matters. And one day, like Aaron, we will lay down our garments, titles, roles, responsibilities, and what will remain is faithfulness. Across these chapters, one theme repeats. Holiness is serious, but it is also protective. Boundaries were not barriers to keep people out. They were safeguards to keep people alive. God was forming a people who understood that his presence was not casual energy, it was sacred fire. And yet, he kept providing. Priests to intercede. Water for cleansing. Miracles in the desert. Successors for leadership. Even discipline was wrapped in covenant love. God is holy. And holiness is relational responsibility. Priests were chosen, but accountable. The people were protected, but required to purify. Moses was trusted, but corrected. Aaron was honored, but replaced. Holiness is not about perfection. It is about reverence. In the wilderness, God was shaping a people who would carry his presence. And today, he is still shaping hearts. You may feel like you're in a desert season. You may be grieving something. You may feel the weight of responsibility. You may even regret a moment where you struck the rock instead of speaking. But the same God who disciplined Moses also walked with him to the very end. Holiness is heavy, but it is holy love. And if you are seeking him sincerely, cleansing is available, grace is present, and your journey still matters. The wilderness was never meant to destroy them. It was meant to prepare them. And perhaps, it is preparing you too.